Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining me for this week's version of our virtual Wednesday Walkabout. My name is Steve Wright. I'm the Director of Horticulture and the Curator here at the Arboretum. And this week we're going to go off the beaten path, outside of our deer exclusion fence, to talk about some of the deer-resistant and deer-tolerant plants that we have been using to beautify the roadsides along Devon State Road. So let's go take a look. So here I am, standing on the side of Devon State Road, looking at this large planting that we've been working on for several years. And I'm holding up here a wild Senna. This is Senna hemicarpa, and it's actually a member of the pea family, and you can see that it has these long bean pods on it. And members of this family can actually sequester nitrogen from the atmosphere and store that nitrogen in their root systems, and it improves the soils. So it's not blooming right now, but it does have very pretty yellow and brown flowers and sort of midsummer. And the pollen has a very high protein content, so the bumblebees especially really enjoy these flowers. It's also the only host plant for several of the sulfur butterflies, the orange and yellow ones that you've probably seen flying around your garden. So it's kind of an ecological workhorse. So moving on now, I'll tell you about a couple of mountain mints. So the mountain mints have a very strong, very minty fragrance when crushed, which makes them unpalatable to deer. They have long since finished blooming, but they do bloom for about 10 weeks in the middle of summer, and they are a favorite of many pollinators. This particular one here is Pycnantum muticum. This tends to be a spreading species. If I come forward a little bit, you'll see this one here is Pycnantum virginianum. This one tends to be more of a clumping species, but it too will spread very slowly in time. And it does look like there are a few flowers here sort of holding on a little bit past. So while I'm right here, I'd like to show you this plant that is just finishing blooming. You can see it still has some pretty nice color on it. This is called anise hyssop, and anise hyssop is also a member of the mint family. And this, instead of smelling like mint though, smells like anise or black licorice, and that's how it got its common name. This will seed around gently in the garden, but it's usually not a nuisance. So just behind the anise hyssop here, we have a plant called blue mistflower, and you can see it's starting to bloom now. This is a late summer to early fall blooming species. It is a member of the aster family, but it looks more like a joe pye weed than a typical aster flower, although joe pye weed is also in the aster family. This is a really good opportunity to talk about the difference between deer-resistant plants and deer-tolerant plants. For those of you that have shopped in our plant shop, I'm sure you've noticed that on our plant information cards, there's a section about deer resistance, and we either say resistant, not resistant, or not preferred. This is one of those plants that we would probably call not preferred, because as you can see, it's out here where the deer are, and it looks perfectly fine, but if you do come in a little closer, you can see that they have been in here munching away at this plant. And so they don't really like to eat it, but they do nibble a little bit. But the plants tend to be vigorous enough that they can sprout back out new shoots and still bloom even when they have been nibbled. This plant here is called golden ragwort, and it's truly one of my favorite plants for a number of reasons. In addition to being completely deer resistant, it stays evergreen and it stays very low and is essentially a ground cover. It will cover a large amount of space given time. One of the things I like best about this plant, though, is its flower. It flowers in very early spring, usually late April to early May, and the flowers will stand about a foot up above the foliage, and they're sort of yellow, daisy-like flowers. They're very pretty. So I started with the herbaceous plants. Now I'm going to talk about some trees and shrubs that you might consider using. So first, we're going to start here with a pawpaw, and pawpaw is one of those plants that has gained in popularity in recent years, mostly because of its really interesting fruits that you're probably familiar with. It's also called a custard apple because it has sort of custardy flesh, and it smells and tastes sort of like banana crossed with a pineapple. We planted about 100 of these out here on the roadside when they were about 2 or 3 feet tall, and as you can see, they have done quite well. And in all this time, I have never seen any deer browse on these pawpaw trees. Here I am now with a plant that I think is underappreciated. This is a plant called coralberry. You see it's a kind of a twiggy shrub, only gets about 3 to 4 feet tall. And it does colonize. It actually sends out these very long stolons similar to a strawberry, and they will reroot and they will pop up. And they're really fantastic to use on a dry slope. But really, these plants are tough as nails. They can grow in all sorts of conditions. The flowers are fairly inconspicuous, but the pollinators really do like them, especially the native bees. And this has actually started to develop berries already, which is why it's called coral berry. It has these kind of pinkish red fruits. And these fruits will persist on the plant through winter or until the birds eat them. And I have before watched the birds standing on top of the snow and jumping up and plucking these berries off of the plants in the winter. So to finish up, I'd like to tell you about this great shrub called the Bottlebrush Buckeye. They can be quite large, up to about 8 feet tall, and they do colonize over time, but it's fairly slow to colonize. These plants, there are about 7 of them out here. These were planted about 5 years ago as well. And I have watched the deer work their way around them, eating lots of other things. And it hasn't been until this year that we've actually noticed any nibbling on these plants at all. So this is one of those that I would consider to be not preferred, but very close to resistant. So what's interesting is they did get nibbled this year, very early. They're completely defoliated by deer, but the plants still had enough time to reproduce new leaves, and they still flowered out here after being nibbled. So this is a great option. Well, that is all we have time for today, but thank you again for joining me. I hope you have the chance to come out to enjoy the gardens, as we are now seeing many of the summer blooming wildflowers overlapping with the early fall bloomers. We will also be starting up with our educational programming this fall, albeit virtual, and I hope you will be able to join in a couple of weeks as I present a more in-depth look at gardening in deer country. Look for that announcement soon. Until then, happy planting!